Good evening. Welcome to the City Council meeting of April 17th, 2023. Would the city clerk please call the roll call?
Mayor Flores is absent tonight. Deputy Mayor Noble
Here.
and Councilmember Tharp
Present.
and Councilmember Dugo.
Here.
Councilmember Diaz.
Here.
Councilmember Bousquet.
Here.
And Deputy Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
That bed has to be a map of Disney.
I'd like to have a motion for agenda approval, please.
Motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
Motion approved by Council Member, we'll get there, Tharp. And second by Council Member Diaz, was it?
Dugo.
Dugo. Okay,
Sorry.
so here we go. We're open for comments from the public for agenda items only.
Vice Mayor, I believe we need to vote on the agenda. There's a
Get a
second.
motion in a second, but we didn't. vote.
Okay. All right, we didn't vote on it, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I'm glad we have the city attorney present. So let's vote on the approval of the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That's 5-0. Okay.
No, it's 4-0.
Do I vote also? I vote.
Yes,
Yeah,
you vote.
so It's
Oh,
5, it's 5-0.
pardon me.
Yeah. All right, so we'll move to comments from the public for agenda items only. Seeing no one, present, we'll go on to the next item, which will be special business, which is, we have nothing. So I would like to have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second.
A motion made by Councilmember Diaz, second by Councilmember Dugo. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0. We will now move on to the regular agenda. Will the city clerk please read item number 5?
Ordinance 2023-05, second reading, amending the City of Green Acres budget for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2022, and ending September 30 of 2023, inclusive, providing for repeal of conflicting ordinances, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date.
All right, it will be presented by Director of Finance, Terry Berger.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, Council. Terry Berger, Finance Department. The last meeting, I presented an ordinance 2023-05 budget adjustment as a first reading. This budget adjustment dealt with several funds. The 301 fund included $24,000 for Tyler NeoGov, $50,000 increase for the EOC and the fire training property, and $200,000 for a Safe Street grant, which is offsetted by grant funds of $150,000. The 304 fund budget adjustment is for a new copier at Public Works, and their old copier will be moved to 301 Swing. We did not budget any copiers this year. So the next budget adjustment is for the 305 fund, which would be adjusted for $90,000 to cover the delay in cost of the Dillman Sidewalk project. The total budget adjustment is $229,000. There was no changes from the first reading to the second reading. The staff recommends approval of 2023-05 on second reading.
Do I have any questions from the council? Hearing no questions, I'll take a motion.
Public hearing.
Is that a public hearing?
Close the public hearing.
All right, we'll open the public hearing. Those of you who have comments in favor of ordinance 2023-05, please come forward. Those who have negative comments to this ordinance, please come forward. Seeing and hearing none, the public hearing is closed.
Motion to approve, ordinance number 2023-05 on second reading.
Second.
Okay, it was a motion made by Councilmember Busquet, second by Councilmember Diaz. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That passes 5-0. All right, we're now moving on to a discussion item, which I had suggested that we bring forward to the council, a subject that is actually very contentious. I'm getting comments wherever I walk. We had probably 200 citizens here asking for an explanation of it. And I think what we have here is something that we haven't thoroughly reviewed. I think a little bit more review into the subject, not so much about the safety aspect, but about the procedural portion of it. And therefore, I'd like to open this up for discussion. So, we'd like to wonder whether there's a possibility we should hold this and eliminate a lot of the bad feelings we're getting from our citizens, and review what other cities have done related to this suggestion or policy. I guess I'd like to know what other cities are involved in it, and how it's handled procedurally related to how do we go along if this is going to be a lot of fines and money involved and maybe hearings of various types. We need to have a clear procedure established. And I'm feeling that at this point, we don't have that built into our system related to this, and maybe a holding back on this for a moment, for a while, until it is reviewed, and then going forward with it later on. So I'd like to open this up for discussion. Councilmember Dugo?
My comment is, I understand that this is a county ordinance that all cities have to adhere to for safety, and I would defer and ask our city manager, the way that I understand it is this does become a code issue if it's not complied to. In other words, if people lock up their home, close it up, and go away for the season. So I would defer to the city manager on the current procedure we use if there's a code case, because this would be assuming a code case, right?
If I may, the regulations surrounding the shutters, the issue related to the shutters, is part of the property maintenance code. Now, several months ago, or maybe a month or so ago, when the council approved the language, they were not approving the language related to shutters. That language has existed since 2018, 2019, somewhere in that time frame when it was initially approved. The only action that was taken by the council a month or so ago was that they were codifying that language, adding that language to the city's code. So prior to that, it was a regulation within the department as to how we were handling shutters, what the requirements were. but we felt that just for transparency purposes, we have a lot of our regulations codified within the code. We felt it was appropriate to add them to the code. So that's what was approved a month ago. But this language has been on the books and has been a rule regulation in the city since 2018, 2019. But it is something that is a code issue. And it's something that, from my perspective, my recommendation would be that if there is an interest or the council has any desire to revisit the language in the property maintenance code, then that would be something that I think that there needs to be some consensus on, that there should be, discussion related to the language within the property maintenance code. But outside of that, it really, not fire, it's more just the requirements within the code, that whether or not the city should be revisiting those and taking another look at them and deciding whether or not we should make any changes to them. So that would be my recommendation, and I think that if there's any consensus needed tonight, it's consensus on whether or not there would be any revisiting of that language within the code. But I will now defer to the city attorney if there's anything that she'd like to add for that.
Thank you. From a code enforcement perspective, the way enforcement happens is when a code inspector is out and observes the violation, in this case being that someone has shutters up longer than the period allowed on the property maintenance code, they will often issue a warning to let the property owner know, hey, we do have a code provision that you've got to remove your shutters within a specific time. It appears you're after that time. Here's your warning. They then have an opportunity to obviously bring the property into compliance, remove their shutters. If they don't, the code inspector can issue a notice of violation. The notice of violation will identify the time frame that they must come into compliance, or they'll have to appear before the special magistrate. So they'll have an additional opportunity to bring the property into compliance. If they don't, then they will have a hearing before the special magistrate. At a hearing before the special magistrate, by law, the special magistrate also has to give them a reasonable time to comply. So the magistrate will give them an additional time to comply. Most often, whether it's shutters or something else, when you are notified through code enforcement, your case doesn't get to the magistrate for usually about 60 or 90 days. Then the magistrate will give you an additional, usually for simple violations, another 30 days to bring it into compliance. If you fail to bring it into compliance at that point, the magistrate can assess you with fines for the violation. This type of violation is not a serious violation, except there is obviously a safety aspect to it, but more than likely you're talking about a $50 a day violation type of fine. That doesn't kick in until the 30 days, at least, ordered by the magistrate begins. Now, if the person shows up at the hearing and says, I've got a hardship, we're out of state, or the person who owns the property is out of state, or we can't comply for this or that reason, the magistrate may give them more time to bring it into compliance. But it would be that fine that would ultimately stop until they brought it into compliance. So there's a lot of notices, there's a lot of time, there's obviously a lot of effort by the city and the code officers to bring it into compliance before it ever gets to the magistrate. And then that's kind of like their last bite at the apple before fines would start to accrue. Obviously, once they do bring it into compliance, they can come in for a fine reduction hearing. And if the property's homesteaded, the fines can be reduced to 3% of the fine amount. Or if it's non-homesteaded, it's a 10%. So it's a very fair process. It's a heavily noticed process, and it does take time because we have to assure them their due process. So it is very unlikely that you would get a notice of a violation and be before the magistrate within 30 days and not have a reasonable amount of time to bring it into compliance.
Can I ask you a question? How many other cities have passed this policy?
I know for a fact I do the code enforcement for Riviera Beach, and I was just pulling up on their property maintenance code because they have a very similar code. In their property maintenance code, the hurricane shutters must be removed no later than 14 days after the termination of the hurricane event, whatever type of hurricane event it may be. unless there is another one predicted to occur within that 14-day time period. So
That's what I
The-
was.
very, very similar. And that's what, and there's two aspects of it. Obviously, the fire chief can speak to the safety aspect. I know from Riviera Beach, and I believe in part, making this part of your codified property maintenance code is the aesthetics. Living next to a house that constantly is boarded up and shuttered aesthetically has some impact.
I don't want to go into semantics, but you said it's 14 days after a hurricane. How about if you put your shutters up before the hurricane? Is there any wording about having your hurricane shutters up before the hurricane? And
From
is
my
that a
understanding of
violation?
of the city's code and Riviera Beach's code, there has to be a predicted, some type of hurricane event that's coming to allow you to shutter your property.
All right, so you can't do it.
So if it just June 1st, you decide to shutter your property, you would be in violation because there would be no predicted storm. Usually there's not until well into hurricane season, but
Even though that's hurricane season starting,
correct.
you know. Well, I guess what I'd like to do is get a consensus. If there's any feeling here that since we see maybe some ambiguity in terms of how our citizens are receptive to this, and obviously very non-receptive to the old idea. I'd like to see whether we could come to some sort of consensus that we would postpone the enforcement of this until a later date. Yes, Council Member Diaz.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Noble. I just have a couple of comments I'd like to make. This ordinance has been on the books as a law in our city since easily 2019. We know that. And yes, we did hear from people that are not in favor of it, but we also did hear from a resident who gave some very compelling reasons as to why she, as a year-round resident, had concerns with it. First, obviously, we know the aesthetics of it. She expressed concerns as to whether or not a fire incident occurs in one of these properties that are boarded, how that can easily spread in some of our condo-style communities to some of the adjacent homes and make it a bigger issue than it needs to be. I'm pretty sure that we could also look at some safety issues from a policing perspective. It's easy for, if somebody pops a door and goes into a dwelling that is boarded up or that is shuttered up, it's difficult for law enforcement to know what is happening there. But beyond all of that, we heard and saw many compelling reasons from our fire chief as to why this is an important ordinance for us to have in our city. It comes down to safety. I personally would like to know that we are doing the best we can do. The safety of our citizens is our top priority. I personally would like to keep this on the books, given the fact that I don't want to wait for an incident to happen for us to look at it again and say, well, maybe that was a bad idea. I trust our fire safety personnel. I trust our police to always educate us and give us the information we need to make the proper decision in this specific case. There are studies that have been done. There are other ordinances from many municipalities around us. I know you mentioned Riviera, but having been in code enforcement in West Palm, I know they have one as well. Most of the municipalities do. It is not something that is foreign to our city. So bottom line is I personally would not be in favor of revisiting this ordinance. Thank you.
Councilmember Dugo, please. Thank you.
Well, I live in River Bridge, and most of the time I get complaints. But I brought this issue forward at a meeting. We even printed in their newsletter this new information, and it was received 100% favorably for safety and exactly what it looks like to be next door to a neighbor that has everything boarded up. And it was really received very well. And safety is certainly our big issue in Riverbridge, fire and law enforcement. So I can't see readdressing something like this.
Someone has brought up the fact that we refer to boarded-up apartments, but how about if there's one window that's closed? Has nothing to do with the rest of the windows and entrances there? Do you make exceptions for situations like that?
I think it needs to be black and white.
Under the code, we do not make an exception for that. If you have a boarded up window, you need to either repair it or unshutter it for whatever reason it's boarded up. It would go through code enforcement for that purpose.
So let's get a consensus. Yes, I'm sorry. Go
Okay,
ahead.
no worries. You were looking at it. It's okay. While we did have a lot of residents from the Pine Ridges, we had a lot of residents who weren't here. And this impacts the entire city of how many homes? 18,000?
Close to 18,000.
We'll call it 18,000 homes. The only people who came out to spoke were one set of communities. So we have to look at it as a bigger picture as well. I think Councilmember Diaz, I could not agree with your comments any more than you've already stated. We have to look to our experts. Our experts are our PBSO, our fire rescue chief. They're the experts. We rely on them for all sorts of information, and I don't think we should even remotely consider taking, chief's words of saying this is a danger to our fire rescue personnel and go, well, it's an inconvenience. So I have no interest in readdressing this.
Deputy
you.
Mayor?
There is an issue here, of course, of the citizenry, how happy or unhappy they are, and whether there's an issue about whether we should look at it from a different perspective in terms of whether we can ameliorate or negotiate a position that maintains us as a city council looking at their concerns and coming up with something more favorable. That was what I was hoping would come out of this discussion. But I see where it's leaning differently. So we'll go down and get a consensus whether we should discuss this further.
May I speak first?
Yes, by all means.
Okay, most of the people that were here were from my development, all from my district. And there were many more. They were all snowbirds. There were many more that thought it was a great idea. So just an FYI, I'm opposed to revisiting this.
Okay, all right, so we'll go down the line. Councilmember Diaz, what is your comment?
I'm opposed to revisiting.
Councilperson Dugo?
Opposed?
Opposed?
Well, you're in favor?
Council
I'm opposed.
I happen to be in favor. Okay. All right, so I guess that's been decided upon. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to other items on the agenda. Comments from the public on non-agenda items. Do we have anyone who would like to speak to us, the council, on non-agenda items? Please come forward now. No one's come forward? All right, we'll go on to our next item, which will be the city manager's report. City manager, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I actually have no report tonight. The only thing that I did want to comment was included in your packets are the reports from each of the departments. There's a lot of really good information within those reports. They are through the end of March, so please take some time to take a look at those if you have not at this point. But it provides some great updates of things that are happening within the departments and what they're working on. Thank you.
All right. We'll go next to the city attorney's report.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I do not have a report. I would just say that I did send out an email late this afternoon on some insurance information and some websites that you can visit for more information about what's going on. Unfortunately, it's not a lot of good news directly to the consumers, but just some information to keep you up to date on what's going on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The mayor and city council report. We'll start with the city council reports. Starting on my right, Mr. Tharp.
Thank you. Just wanted to say thank you to staff, PBSO, Fire Rescue. Michelle's not here this evening, but her and her team, another amazing extravaganza this past Saturday. I don't think I've seen so many kids so excited at once. Fantastic event, so thank you to everyone. Christy, thank you for the information. It looks like a lot of it is, that they hope something is going to be done. And then I like the last one that said, yeah, and then we're going to increase it by 1%. So we really need to keep this front of mind. This is something that's going to impact every one of us, every citizen here. And then lastly, I see some members of some younger people here for a change. Hopefully, you guys learned something and you saw a good example of how we work together. Even though we don't always agree on everything, hopefully we set a good example for you. And that's all I have this evening.
Thank you. I'll pass also. I have nothing to report. I'll go on to Councilmember Dugo.
I have two things. Number one, today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. I'd like us to take a moment to recognize that time in history. And on a good note, the League of Cities Scholarship Committee met, and we selected 5 individuals for recipients, and we invited them and their families to the Kravis Center to the League of Cities installation banquet so that they can truly get a good scholarship award and some recognition. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Councilmember Diaz.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just echoing Councilmember Tharp's comments about the extravaganza. It was a lot of fun. Just seeing those little faces was fantastic. Note, I did not knock over the Easter Bunnies display, so I got out of that one well this time. And the same, it's wonderful to see public participation always. Your participation and you being here helps us do a better job. So it's lovely to see you all here today, and our regulars as well, who are always wonderfully sharing your thoughts and your feedback with us. So thank you for being a part of the process.
Thank you. Councilmember.
Nothing to
Okay.
report, thank you.
Nothing, thank you. Well, then I will call this meeting to adjourn.
Thank you. Motion.
And thank you for this opportunity.